Hey everybody, this is Scoots, and you're listening to Bedtime Stories from Sleep With Me, which is just stories from the Sleep With Me podcast. So if you like the stories from Sleep With Me, you've even checked out our original podcast, a full length. It's called Sleep With Me. And if you enjoy these stories, you could support the production of the show and get tons of stories-only versions of Sleep With Me on Sleep With Me Plus. If this show is worth, if you listen to it on a regular basis, you say, this show is worth $60 a year to me. This show's worth $120 a year to me. Sign up. You can sign up monthly or annually. You get a podcast with story-only versions of Sleep With Me, like this, but ad-free. You get full versions of Sleep With Me, bonus versions of Sleep With Me. And you help us keep making the show well into, hopefully, like the long future. So, but if you're new, check this out. This is called Bedtime Stories from Sleep With Me. And it'll be Bedtime Stories from Sleep With Me podcast. Thanks and good night. Friends beyond the binary, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I had trouble saying something. It's time for the podcaster who says, geez, are you curious for me to go on meanders about curiosity? You say, I don't know. I'm curious what you're rambling about. Well, I'm here. If you ever have trouble falling asleep, if you're new, this podcast is here to keep you company and take your mind off of stuff because you deserve a good night's sleep. That's really what I'm here for. And I'm going to explain everything here in a little bit of the structure of the show, why I make the show. But the main reason is to be here to keep you company so that you could fall asleep. And the show is very, very different. It's out of the ordinary. It's not extraordinary. But I'm here to be your friend in the deep, dark night and keep you company. And I'm glad you're here. And if you're new, don't worry about this, but if you're a regular listener, these are the ways I'm able to be here for you for free twice a week. Hey, everybody, this is Scoots. If you're looking for the most comfortable way to listen to Sleep With Me podcast or bedtime stories from Sleep With Me, you can get yourself a pair of sleep phones, like Sleep With Me merchandise sleep phones with different logos and cool stuff on there. And you could get that at sleepwithmepodcast.com/sleepphones. And use Sleep With Me at checkout to save $5 off your order. Thanks, everybody. All right, everybody. Scoots here, and this is a crossover episode with the podcast Curious State and my friend Doug that interviewed me. I don't know when Doug interviewed me now. It was the spring of a year. Was it I think it was the winter. I'd have to look back at my email, which I could do in a bit. And you heard me talk about Curious State. You could check it out in your podcast app of choice. But we've done this before, and we do it again. We'll do it again. It's a meandering. This was episode 12. Does this episode make you sleepy? And this is a machine transcription, so this is going to be good, and we'll see what meanders come out of it. But first, looks like Doug sets it up. There's a summary of keywords from this transcription engine. Sleep meandering, podcast, listeners, people listening, story. So this is good. These might be, I would say listeners and listening are probably number one and number two important things. Meandering's important. People, listeners, people listening. Story, sleepy characters, Drew, asleep, stay, friends, wagon. Remember a boy with his wagon? His wagon was at well, that'd be interesting to see when wagon comes up. Did it come up more than once? Episode, bedtime stories, tales, brain, and early, and thoughts. So then Doug sets it up. There's nothing like some truly delicious sleep, the kind where you're out cold the minute you hit the pillow. You find yourself among the lilac-scented clouds, symphonies of roses, painting images on endless fields. the kind of sleep dreams are made of. Do you remember the last time that actually happened? I mean, either, but we try hard, don't we? We listen to soothing music. We meditate. We stay away from screens a half hour before bed. Some of us even put on a special headband and listen to audiobooks like The Wizarding World to sweep us into dreamland. Oh, this is interesting. So this is the first really good one with the machine screen. So, but what if you had a bedtime buddy? Apple Tonic Powell. Apple Tonic Powell. I don't know what that, who could slow the thoughts running through your head and lull you to sleep? Lull you, but lull you. Remember the song, there was a band called Cracker, and their hit was Low, or one of their hits, I think. And there was David Lowery, who I believe became a movie director. Am I getting my facts correct? I don't know. Apple Tonic Powell. Apple Tonic Powell. You had a bedtime story. Apple Tonic Powell. 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 A bedtime, I don't know. Apple Tonic Powell. And then I think they go to, then I introduce myself. I'm Drew Ackerman. I go on the podcast by Deer's Scooter. Old Deer's Scooter. Rides a tractor, a Deer's tractor. He's been riding that tractor for years, going off topic and meandering out in the field. I tell him, son, tractor's made for tractor-related activities, not for just driving around. Well, that's why I bought my own tractor, Papa. Remember, with my newspaper money? And I said, I'm going to drive that tractor around and around. It's a meander tractor, Papa. It's all, Papa. Do you want to? Oh, I was using your tractor though, Pa. You know, but you could use mine. It's actually newer. I bought you a tractor so I could use yours. Remember, you agreed to all this. Oh, I thought you were in the middle of a Curious State episode, turned into a Sleep With Me episode. I was, but then I went off topic. Old Deers. It's a bedtime story for, I go by Deer's Scooter and I make a podcast called Sleep With Me, bedtime stories for adults. I put people to sleep for a living. You like it? People always say, are you an anesthesiologist? That's what people say too. Like total strangers, or somewhat strangers. They say, what do you do for a living? I put people to sleep. Oh, you're an anesthesiologist? Usually that's more impressive than a sleep podcaster if you're trying to charm someone, by the way, just so you know, if you think, I guess also a process of elimination. It eliminates everybody. They said like, but one day it won't eliminate the right person. Oh boy. I say no. When I first go to podcast meetups like 2012, 13, 14, and you'd sit around in a circle and everybody would say what podcasts they wanted to make or what they were working on. And I would just see these blank faces. And I'd be like, yeah, this is my podcast, bedtime stories in there. And I'll read it and then I'll explain it. Just like they'd be just that poor guy. Like I can see their head, like I would share and they'd be like, oh, okay. So you're a little weird. So yeah, I would go to these podcast meetups, right? And, this was early days, 2012, before podcasts existed, and then after I started it. And the first few, they were just starting up. So everybody was a little nervous. And also, we all get like a competitive thing, like where are we on the social whatever hierarchy with strangers. But you would sit around in a circle and you'd say, oh, I'm thinking about starting I'm working on a podcast called this, or I'm thinking about, and I'd say, oh boy, I got to do this again. I don't even remember the first time. I kind of do. Maybe I just said, yeah, I'm working on, but I said, I make a podcast. It's like, to put people to sleep. I'm sorry. It's like a bedtime stories. It's called Sleep With Me. Next. Like usually I just do that really fast and then say, okay, go ahead. But I could see, because you're sitting in a circle, everybody's faces, and they'd be like, what? And then later, if there was questions, they'd say, wait, can we go back to you? Or sometimes people would be assertive enough. They'd say, I'm sorry, can you explain that a little bit better? And then even then I was not enthusiastic. So I said, well, it's like, I was trying to maintain a slow, trying to stay small. And I said, it's in a mesa. And they'd say, huh. But then later what would happen is I would achieve some level of comfort with the group, and then unrelated to Sleep With Me, like I would share something where I'd talk more about the show in a more animated way. And then someone inevitably would say, oh, okay, I get it now. Like now that I see you, dear one, they were subtextually saying, and they say, I see you're an odd bird. Nothing wrong with it, especially if you're in a group of podcasters. It's totally an accepting place for the most part. And they say, okay, now I can see it. So it's funny, but like when I'm not being myself, or I'm being a dialed down hidden version of myself, people would be, but when I was a little bit relaxed, they'd say, okay, that makes perfect sense for you. So, okay, so then Doug says, little did they know the idea would gently skyrocket in popularity. Today, Sleep With Me gets over 3 million downloads every month. It's still pretty much the same. It's over 100,000 people every night falling asleep to Drew's hypnotic voice and meandering tales. But how does he do it? What's the secret sauce to losing a football stadium's worth of people sleeping every night? I'm Doug Frazier. And this is Curious State, the art of a sleepy story, part 1, take the meandering road home. So, Drew, what do you think are some key elements that make a story sleepy? Thanks, Doug. Glad we're here together in my imagination. Doug and I have become good friends, so ideally there's some structure to it. If it's going really well, it's something that's just out of focus. So like the person listening, they can kind of make out the details, but it's not so visceral or clear. And really, I mean, just like a good podcast or regular podcast, I think it needs to have something for the listener to connect to, or just hang on, in my case, like hang their thoughts on, like they're taking off their work jacket. This is kind of, what's that, friend to be your neighbor. Who was that guy? Seminal figure, Oscar, I think Tom Hanks won it. This is where my mind, Fred Neighbors, that was his name. Good Neighbor Show. Mr. Friendly? No. How can I not remember? Mr. Rogers. Fred Neighbors, not his name. Fred Rogers was his name. One of my heroes. But yeah, this is just my brain working or not working. Okay, take off their work jacket. So see how that's an archetypal thing that Fred Rogers did. So whether it's a character or details or something immersive or something happening, but it has to misdirect their attention. Say, hey, I'm going to listen to this strange person talk to me while I'm vulnerable and in bed. It put embed, like embed code, and see how it goes instead of thinking about whatever it is that's keeping me awake. But pretty good transcription. For listeners, it could be anything like last year we did a few where I would read through toy catalogs and kind of riff on the toy catalogs. 24-hour repeat musical alarm features Pac-Man characters, electric sound effects, play with progressive levels of difficulty, automatically records the highest score. Was $44.95. Maybe this is a clip from the show. Now $90.95. Roulette game. Watch $90.95. So people love that. And then other people, if you put one of those out again, they say, I'll never listen again. That's true. Every day. So it's like finding a variety for listeners to just keep going and keep taking small risks. But then for me as a creator, and it's really tough to explain this, but but I only need it to happen like once every 12 to 16 months where I sit down and record something and I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. And then it turns out really, really well. I think, and probably I talked about this. Maybe I'll talk about it coming up of the Jenny, the username generator is my standard. But I know there's been other episodes. And honestly, now I'm finding the reverse true. This is Drew speaking outside a curious state, but expounding on it. I've been, listening to episodes like a few months before they come out. And there's been it's like every 4 months, because I'm recording further out, where I'll record episode, 3 months will pass, then I'll listen to the episode. And I'm really proud of it, where I'm like, wow, and I think that's nice to have some distance from it. And be like, and I can think of, there's the one dog, cat, llama roommate. I'm very proud of that episode. And there was a series of episodes like that, like a beanstalk one. And then more recently for me, but probably not more, maybe more recently, a few Fast and the Furious, and what is that other one? I don't know. This is gone from the teapot and flannel. As well as like the Lasso episodes, and I don't know. So now I'm having a different experience where it doesn't happen in the spark of creation. It's like afterwards they say, wow, you did really good at that. And I think it's also because I have a separation between the creative side and the production side. So when I'm listening, I'm not listening so much as the writer voiceover person as the producer, and saying to the voiceover and the writer, because usually these would be separate positions in a podcast. But not Curious State. Doug does like a lot of podcasts are like one person doing all these different roles. But whereas a producer, which is different as than a producer on a TV show or a movie, it's a little bit different. It's more of like a hands-on position, like an editor. Just a word. But I say, wow, you did. I really liked that. More like a television segment, like a producer who's doing segments, or news producer, even though it's not journalism. You say there's more of a immediacy to the feedback. I like those choices you made. No, here it comes. I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. In the episodes where Drew goes in blind, Doug says, something strange happens. He gets swept up in the story and forgets himself. He becomes one with the narrative, a vehicle for possibility. Oh, thank you, Doug. That's very kind of you to say. Like the time he told the story from the perspective of a sentient user generator named Jenny. So this is where also voiceover, this is my producer brain talking about Curious State. This is like a benefit of this style of interview podcast is maybe there was a gap in my answer to Doug's questions. And so Doug was able to use like a voiceover here, or at least as I'm seeing it in the transcript, to fill in the gap in clarity in my answer possibly, and in a way that benefits the listener. Now we're totally in a meta zone here, but because I was thinking that it must be exhausting to have to deal with it every day. I'm thinking of the username generator, Jenny. And so I was like, let's do an interview and sit down with the username generator. Again, it would be exhausting because so many people would be writing these inappropriate usernames and thinking they're funny. And it went in a direction I didn't expect, and it just stayed lulling and stuff. And for me, it's like being surprised by the process, because it is such a process-based thing that I forget about all the time. That was me adding that part on the end. But episodes of Sleep With Me, this is Doug, episodes of Sleep With Me range in topics, toy catalogs, fiction, recipes. The wealth of imagination runs deep no matter the subject. Each episode is structured around a beginning, middle, and end. Between two pieces of nighttime narrative bread is tasty, sleepy stuff, the meandering. Okay, and this, I think, is a clip. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends beyond the binary. It's time for the podcaster who says, I'm going to wash those thoughts right out of your hair. If I didn't, I wonder what you do say. What's up with that? What's up with the scale here? Lenny, things about your shahar. Your schedule is supposed to go with that washing the hair stuff. And I don't have the best hair anyway. So tonight only, a hashawu. It feels good to have no spoon bubbles up there. It is good. Believe me, the bubbles are on the inside and the outside. And then Doug says, what does that meandering have in telling a sleepy story? And I say, so I call them meander points, which kind of sounds a bit like me underpants. I can't believe you left that in there. That's funny. Meander points, meander pants. I love that. It does. Meander points, me underpants. But meander points is like, for me, it's the story. What do you like? What are you wearing to the SpongeBob SquarePants ball? Me underpants. Sorry, I thought I said I meant my underpants, but I said meander points. But I can't wear those. I can only live them. It starts off with something like a beginning, whether it's a character that has a want or something or needs something, question mark. And then it's like, okay, how would they solve this problem? And ideally, there's either one I already have in mind, or it's like, okay, I know what they need. How am I going to get to the end? And in between that, if I have some points, I can stay calm. So it's like, sometimes I'll write stories, sometimes I'll plot them out, or sometimes I'll use a randomizer. And I'll have a list of random words or random songs or pictures, and that helps me go on the meander because it's like I can always go back. Like if I have something concrete to return to, even if it's a picture, it helps me relax when I feel like the meanders are petering out. So this is key stuff in here about Sleep With Me. So it's like keeping the story going just enough. Sometimes I feel like me and the listener are sort of riding in some sort of wagon and someone else is driving and the wagon is very bumpy. And I wonder if I expound on this because this is actually an interesting analogy. I remember talking about it. I don't know if it's a fully formed analogy. And you could kind of, the listener, could spill out of the wagon at any point you want. There I do. It's like some safe place where there's hay everywhere, inside the wagon, outside the wagon. But hypoallergenic hay, of course, for people like me. And you don't have to worry. The wagon's going to the next meander point. You could get right back on the wagon, or you could spill out and fall asleep anytime you want. Or I could fall out of the wagon, and it's just like, oh, wait a second. That reminds me of what I had for breakfast, even though it has nothing to do with anything, and see where that goes, and then try to bring it back again. So let's see if we can come back to that wagon analogy. But Doug asks, in that process, how do you find the Goldilocks zone between making the show too interesting that it keeps people awake and just interesting enough that it lulls them to sleep? And I answer, well, I guess that's a question that keeps me making the show, actually. I think for me, it's also about having fun and in some sense, like seeing where that line is without pushing too hard. So right now we're doing a series. So there's a giant dinosaur and we're doing a series on those giant beings. Moth breath is one of them, fighting like the Spice Friends that are like giants similar to Care Bears. And it's like, that's the plot of the story, okay? That's pretty intense. They're fighting over Earth and human beings are at risk. And, but that's what I like. That's the kind of puzzle I like to solve. It's like, okay, how can we make it sleepy? And it fails sometimes. I got an email from somebody and they're like, I don't like that. I don't like to be reminded of giant lizards roaming the earth. And it's like, okay, I totally respect that. And it's like exploring the comfort zone together, being the listeners and knowing like, okay, sometimes I'm going to trip and fall on my face. And then Doug says, whatever the sleepy story Drew decides to tell, there are certain topics he must avoid at all costs. The Art of a Sleepy Story, Part 2. Don't freak people out, man. I like that. Sleep is sort of a holistic healing tool for our bodies and minds. It helps with retaining information. Without it, your brain can become essentially waterlogged. Studies show if you want to improve your memory, it's best to get a good night's sleep to prime your brain the night before, to let this information soak deep into the recesses of your memory. And sleep is also personal, and some listeners of Drew's podcast have strong opinions about what they do and don't like. Okay, this is interesting because we'll have to, early on, yeah, like I mentioned, there's beings that, work, web-based beings and beings with they're non-warm-blooded. You don't check it and say, and people are like, what were you thinking? You make a sleep podcast. Like where I mentioned milk, that can't be right. Well, I've never done it before, so I was like, oh, okay. No of those beings. Now we call them like, cold-blooded friends, friends with cool blood, web-based beings. So now I try to come up with fun stuff like that. Money, voting based, just like money, people, leading figures, stuff around anything that's going to have a strong emotional impact. And then early on, I had to learn to get over myself. Like when I was first doing the show, I was a bit more self-deprecating in a way that was unkind. And early people would be like, well, that's not what I tuned into a podcast to hear. Someone making fun of themselves and not being nice to themselves. And another one is not pointing out the fact that people can't sleep. Because early on it was like, hey, maybe nobody's listening. And people emailed me, 2 different listeners, and they said, you know what? I thought we had made an arrangement where you could keep me company in the deep, dark night. And then you violated our arrangement and pointed out I was all alone. And I couldn't sleep, and it really hurt my feelings. And that was such a powerful thing to do. I mean, I didn't even know if this podcast would exist without that early feedback where it's like, okay, I had to keep that in mind. And always that people are in a fragile state. And some people have a form of insomnia, where they're not going to fall asleep and they're listening for a form of companionship or distraction. So I do want to comment on this a little bit. It's like, we got this, like a lot of this early when the podcast was developing as my hobby. It was like, and there was like a smaller audience pool, right? I like feedback about, hey, don't talk about web-based beings directly. Or these different things, the relationship, I don't know, there's a more immediacy of, okay, let's alter this. And now I have to that was when there was feedback was more rare and it was pretty level for the most part. And I don't know if that's more a reflection of the outside world or just the world of podcasts, but in the past 5 or 6 years, this has become much more like a hayride without the hay, trying to navigate, because people like either express their opinions in a non-constructive way, or it just may be like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like it's a little bit different now, where it's become much more time-consuming to parse through stuff. And to get an idea, okay, this person is more having a rough day, and I'm the person, I was the last person they're going to talk to that day. Or more like, I don't know what that person's going out that person's day, but this, I don't know if this is a very nice thing to say. And a lot of times I just read through it and I'm saying, would I say this to somebody at a grocery store? That's almost always what I use, the grocery store rule. And, this is a tangent, by the way. This didn't come up on the podcast, or maybe it does later. But you do use that grocery store rule because it's like, okay, if I read a piece of feedback and I wouldn't say it to someone out loud that I don't know at a grocery store, at this point, I don't really, I can't, that's like my parse. And then I'd say, okay, I think I would, or I'm not sure, then I probably would parse it. But if it's a no, or yeah, oh no, yeah, no, I wouldn't be comfortable saying that. Or, even if it's the words around, like if I take out the stuff about the podcast and put it in about honeydew melons, or frozen foods, like a lot of times, even if it starts out a certain way, I say, well, okay, like, so that's actually been helpful. Sometimes I forget to use that, but I say, oh, okay. If I wouldn't speak to someone that way at a grocery store that I don't know, it's okay to just delete it, and not parse it. And again, that's also because it is like my primary thing is to keep making keep the show going. Oh, and then Doug says that, there's a lot of pressure on your shoulders. I've learned that it's, if I'm trying to create a safe place for people to fall asleep, I also have to think that it also has to be safe for me to fail. And that's not easy. Like I constantly overthinking it or worrying about it. But it's like this weird thing where like, yeah, sometimes you're going to fail and sometimes the listeners are going to be, not happy about it, or not every listener is going to like every episode. And there's going to be people that don't like you at all. And like, okay, it's going to be okay because it would be kind of authentic, serious way to describe it. But I'm like trying to stay calm and be present so I can tell the story to a person and help them fall asleep. And if I get caught up in my own self-criticism, it definitely distracts from the purpose of the show. Okay, this is back to Doug. The purpose has big impacts. A lack of sleep is not good for mood, creative output, self-control, stuff, looking at stuff with the front of your head and stuff, It's like, okay, what helps with self-control, gatekeeping, emotional, switched off, lack of sleep's not good for that. Not only are we groggy, impulsive, we could be. Sound familiar? Oh boy, does it. If you want to dig into the nitty gritty of sleep, you have to check out Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. I can't recommend it highly enough. In most literal sense, it's a life-changing book. Here's a passage that has stuck with me. So this is Doug quoting Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. Sleep is not a credit system or bank. You can't recover the sleep. But we can accumulate a debt, but not without penalty, and we can't repay that debt at a later time. So Drew's Meandering Stories act more than just fun tales. They help listeners from going into sleep debt. And now, if all goes right for the episode, most listeners won't be awake to the end. They've drifted off to dreamland long before then. But for those who are still awake, what does the ending look like? How do you get out of it? How do you get out of a sleepy story? Okay, so there's a conundrum. Okay, so this is me answering. There's a conundrum of sleep podcasts right there. It's like there's nothing worse than not knowing how a story's going to end for me, the storyteller. Because it's like I have my producer brain that's loosely listening to everything I'm saying because I'm monitoring my audio and some part of my brain is listening. And of course, it's helping me course correct, ideally without paying attention to what I'm saying. And then I'm also acutely aware of the clock. So it's like, even though I don't make a radio show, that's a radio show term, the clock, like, because if you're making a 9-minute segment, it's got to be 9 minutes. With sleeping, it's looser than that, but it is like I like to have the episodes be somewhat in a certain range. I did like one with a marionette. Oh, this is funny. Like working with Jack of Jack and the Beanstalk. And I was like, this should be simple to solve. Like they should just get to the top and get the golden chicken or whatever it is. But the characters kept making these choices and I'd be like, okay, they want to go over there. And I'm like, okay, we're at 47 minutes now. But at the same time, if anything distracts me from being there, it's kind of like a liability. Then again, it's me getting in the way. So like, okay, you could trust this, that you work out, or trust that the characters or gently guide them towards a solution. And then there's times that the landing is not stuck, or if the landing is too intense, like if you like somebody not landing a jump or something like on YouTube, I'm trying to listen in a sense and be like, okay, we'll do a little postscript here to say, okay, just remember. So this is like probably Odder Things is a good example. Okay, just remember, everything's going to be okay. All will be well, as Emma Otter said. Or if there's an unresolved part of the series, it'd be like, okay, now the characters are going to rest together. So those ones are a little bit of a cheat, but it's keeping the audience in mind. Okay, can we turn the volume down if we can't end in a way that feels satisfactory? The puzzle solving is what keeps me going, and the connection with the listeners, knowing, okay, when I'm trying to solve the puzzle, they benefit from it. But I realize it's also like, man, this is a bit bonkers. Every time I hear myself talking about this, I'm like, yeah, you're chasing windmills. You're chasing windmills. But it's like, oh, okay, how lucky am I to be like, man, I'm really grateful. And I'm grateful to help people. Whether it's my show or another show, they are struggling with something I can relate to. And it's really important to me because I know how it feels in not being able to sleep. And this is Doug. And in our attention-grabbing world, it's too easy to neglect sleep, almost comically so. After all, we have better things to do. We barter a good night's sleep for a few more episodes of a TV show, a couple more hours of scrolling, until we find ourselves in a new normal one where we're endlessly tired and make endless plans to change it. We make a bad habit of good intentions. Listening to Sleep With Me made me appreciate a different, quieter kind of experience, lovable meandering. It becomes a space you can sink your mind into and just be like the calming voice in the dark, blowing hush bubbles, whispering sweet cotton candy secrets and letting your thoughts fade into transparent rice paper like dream, awaiting its friend's arrival. And that friend is you. To learn more about Drew, go to sleepwithmepodcaster.com. And if you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, email me at curious@quickanddirtytips.com. If you prefer talking over typing, you can leave Doug a voicemail, 757-541-8471. And for more information about the show and where you can find us, check out our show notes, quickanddirtytips.com. Special thanks to Quick and Dirty Tips team. You got Adam Cecil. Ooh, that's a familiar name there. Audience development and podcast manager, Morgan Christensen. Podcasts and advertising operations specialist, Holly Hutchings. And our digital operation specialist, Davina Tomlin. Marketing and publicity assistant, and our trusty intern, Brendan Pica. Curious State is hosted and produced by me, Doug Frazier, or Doug, not me. It's part of the Quick and Dirty Tips Network, which is a division of Macmillan Publishers and Mignon Fogarty, Inc. Until next time, stay curious. But I'm still curious because we got a few more minutes here. So just going through the transcript again of like, I know we have that hayride. There was something else, though. Going to podcast meetups, that poor guy. Anything else I wanted to describe in there? I can't think of it. Structure, something just out of focus. Oh, this taking off your work jacket. I think we covered that. I apologize, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, that I totally forgot. I don't know. That's where I talk about the listener's trust. Like when people first listen, that it's like, okay, I'm going to listen. Like, and I guess that's where I understand the feedback I get from people who are never going to listen to the show again when their mind is kind of blown because the podcast is so different than what they expected. But I do try to spend a lot of time, and I'm even trying to figure out lately, this is early summer 2022, of like, what other ways can I do to like get across some of the essential information of the podcast early so that people can stop listening, or they say, oh, okay, I will give this a try. There is no pressure for me to like the show or to fall asleep, I think is the key to the show. I think the key to everything. And like, just like when, for me at least, someone says, hey, I want to play you this song. A lot of times it's like that for me, because I'm not the greatest person in the world. It sets me up to dislike the song because I know they like it and they want me to like it, right? And so then I say, well, do we have to listen to it right now? Can I just listen to it later when I'm alone or something? Because that's like a lot of pressure on me. And I don't know, that's like one of the things with the show is like say, hey, no pressure to like the show or to fall asleep, but give it a try and know that your expectations may get in the way of things. Because now this show doesn't really defy expectations or exceed them. Or it goes under them. It's meanders around expectations, I guess. And that's definitely hard to get across. But also the respect I have for people that do take that risk and say, okay, I'll give it a try anyway, like either out of desperation or willingness, or, hey, I'll give it a shot. One of my friends recommended it. And that it does take 2 or 3 tries for a lot of people. Yeah. Okay, so we did a toy catalogs. Some people love it, and some people are like, yeah, don't put that out. Again, I've learned that to kind of separate episodes, like the Ray episodes come out 3 or 4 times a year, catalog ones 3 or 4 times a year. Trying to think what other ones. Tale of the Tape come out like once or twice a year. What other recurring style to like, and that kind of goes to, this is if you're listening, and is why the episodes have a certain rhythm, is like, or why, like, so we have a very set release schedule, which may, when you're listening to this, have changed again as I was working on something. That when I'm recording, this isn't actual finalized, but it'll help with, like, a lot of it comes down to keeping the podcast coming out twice a week, where we used to be at 3 times a week. But it was at 3 times a week where I found the majority of listeners need variety because, and the reason they need it is because then that gives you permission and not like every episode, right? And some reassurance that, the rhythm of the episodes is changing, but it comes at a rhythm too, which is we have 3 styles of shows we make. We have the TV style recap show. We have random Tuesday, we call them trending Tuesday episodes, but it's like a potpourri style, which is like some of those ones I listed, or just a random single bedtime story unrelated to anything else. Or an occasional series like Purple People Circus or something that's not a series, but like occasional recurring characters. And then we have a written series that runs for a season of somewhere between 10 and 12 episodes, or a holiday series. So we do sometimes for a certain number of episodes. And the reason for that is, one, it creates a constant variety. It plays to some of Sleep With Me's strengths, which is like variety, but also whether it's the TV shows that have some recurring characters or some other form of familiarity. And the written series are the same way, recurring characters and familiarity. Well, it doesn't work it works for the majority of the Sleep With Me listeners, but not all of Sleep With Me listeners, right? But also making the show takes it's a big investment, and like making just one kind of episode just wouldn't be possible long term for me. I guess if like I did, like the podcast became part of another company and there was then to say, okay, like, I'm only responsible to make 12 episodes a year. That would be different if other teams were like, we'll make 12 episodes a year, whatever. But for me, that I'm responsible for most of the episodes every year, it means I need to draw from 3 different wells of creativity. But at the same time, those wells support one of the other. Like the weird thing is, without the TV recap episodes, I wouldn't have the time to like really invest in like listening and visually taking in other successful shows and performances and and character development, which impacts the other two styles of shows in a positive way. If I'm watching an episode of Ted Lasso 3 or 4 times, or Great British Bake Off 3 or 4 times, it's like, oh, I can see how they are doing their stories, and as a fan enjoy it. But how are they editing those segments at Great British Bake Off? Or what colors are they using? And that trickles into, that supports the success of the other two styles of shows. The Random Tuesday shows could become like something recurring where we discover a character, or they just give me the freedom to kind of talk. Like if something comes up when I'm on a walk, or I did something, or I went on a trip, or I observed something, to be able to make a show about that. And while those shows take the least amount of preparation, like those are the kind of shows I'm always preparing for. I have lists everywhere. But when it comes down to it, it's like, oh, okay, what's a recording schedule look like this week? Okay, well, we need a Tuesday style episode. We don't have, should we pick something from the listers, or something else you want to make? I don't know. Okay, well, we'll wait till the day before then and decide. It could be like that. And then the written episodes, again, writing supports other storytelling you hear in the other episodes. Yeah, I mean, it makes the other episodes better. Like by me becoming a better meandering storyteller, I can just look at new, whoa, how are we using this narrative voice? Oh, how many characters can we manage? Oh, how can we make this episodically modular? Oh, how do we make this serialized, but with respect to the audience? Oh, how should this one be more visual or more audio? How structured are the characters versus letting the listeners structure and create the characters? What are their relationships like? What do they want? Where are they going? I don't know. And then just seeing, especially when you stick with something like for 10 to 12 episodes, you have to go like to make 10 or 12 episodes. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs in the writing and creation process. But also lets me see what's missing when I'm listening to them. I say, wait a second, this episode, these were more intellectual. I need something a little more emotional. So then it informs the next thing I make, whether it's whatever style episode. And when I say like we could be doing something next, like I am working on something, because again, I'm saying if Sleep With Me remains an independent podcast, how do I keep doing that into the future? Both trying to find ways to support the show, but also creatively keep it going. And so I have looked at optioning seasons of something and fiction. And I mean, I'm probably by the time this comes out, we'll be ready to announce it. Maybe not. So I won't say the name of the show, but we're pretty far along with optioning 3 seasons of a fiction podcast that then I would be able to release. So we'd have a 4-show rhythm. And I don't know what that would look like, but it'd probably be like a TV podcast, then like the written series, then a Trending Tuesday style one, and then this optioned series, which I would still voice and rewrite in the Sleep With Me style. We've done this a lot as one-offs, but that creates another kind of creative well that I draw from, similar to the TV well, where it's like a little bit more of observational, and it just is like, I don't know, and will it help us to stay sustainable? I don't know. I mean, a lot of that comes also down to listeners, because it's like that does come with a much higher cost, because when I do it myself, again, like I can make those costs like there isn't a cost, but that's the other thing about staying the show sustainable, why we cut back to 3 episodes and why we're trying to explore It's like, okay, is there listener support who's people support the sponsors or support the show on Patreon to be able to pay for this option of another show? And then again, okay, that would definitely help keep the podcast going much longer in the future if that's sustainable. Be like, okay, what would be the next show we would option or whatever? But also to highlight, I mean, the more exciting thing for me is to highlight other creators and their brilliant work and say, oh, I need to listen to that podcast during the day, the original one. Very similar to this crossover episode. This is why I love doing these ones. If you haven't listened to the Curious State episode, go ahead and listen to it and then start listening to, I mean, it's a great podcast. You're already in a curious state if you're listening to Sleep With Me, but so you can listen to my interview and then subscribe to the show. Doug's just a wonderful, wonderful person. Really, he is someone like it's not, he lives in that curious state. So it's funny that that's the name of the show. Or I'm laughing because that's like when I think of Doug, I say, okay, that's somebody that's in the curious state. He's curious about like subjects and people and stuff. So check out Curious State. And thanks so much for listening to the show. I really appreciate it. Good night. All right. I want to thank everybody that became a patron recently. I want to thank Suze, Jennifer, and Joni. Thank you. Thanks, and good night. Gwen, David, and Lois. Thank you. Thanks, and good night. Rich, Julie, and Gail. Thank you. Thanks, and good night. Colin, Arthur, and Cindy. Thank you. Thanks, and good night. Lisa, Jennifer, and GR. Thank you. Thanks, and good night. Bonnie, Hillary, and Cody. Thank you. Thanks, and good night. Lori, Emily, and Aiden. Thanks, and good night. Milena, Juliet, and W. Thank you. Thanks, and good night. Mackenzie, Heather, and Mo. Thank you. Thanks, and good night. And Peter, Kevin, and Andreas. Thank you. Thanks, and good night. Thanks to everybody who supports the show directly on Patreon or by other means or supports our sponsors. That's how we're able to be here for everybody for free twice a week. And that's why I take the time always to thank those people. I actually record the thank yous before I record the episodes. So I keep in mind how grateful I am to be able to make this podcast, put it out twice a week for free. And the gratitude I have for those people, for everybody listening, but the ability to make it free. Yeah, it's like cool, huh? So thank you so much for everybody that takes that extra step and supports the show voluntarily. And because of that, because of the support we've gotten over the past couple of years, we only used to have 200 free episodes in the free feed. And now we've got these Tuck You In sponsors. We have almost 500 when I'm recording this. We'll be over 500 probably by the time you hear this. So that's amazing. So thanks so much for supporting the show or spreading the word about the show or just listening or checking the podcast out. Thanks and good night. And yeah, by the way, there's like 497 as of this moment episodes you could listen to right after this or make a playlist, So thanks and good night.